the GHD. This might be a piece of equipment that you've seen in a gym, have no idea how to use it or what to do with it. But in this video, we're going to show you some tips and helpful exercises for the GHD sit-up. This is your GHD. The GHD stands for glute ham developer. Ironically, in CrossFit, the most infamous movement with the GHD has become the GHD sit-up, which has nothing to do with your glutes and hamstrings. So there's lots of exercises that we can do here, and in future videos we'll be looking at that.
Wait.
However, to start with the GHD sit-up, because that's the movement that you'll have seen throughout CrossFit Games, throughout quarterfinals, whatever it may be, and it's quite commonly programmed in classes. So the GHD, you can see it's like a big piece of equipment, but really the points that we concern ourselves with are these pads where we sit, the pads where we put our feet, and then all of this structure which can be adjusted, and that's what we're going to look at now, how to set up the GHD correctly for a GHD sit-up. The setup of the GHD is very important. Here we have Patrick sitting on. If you just put your feet in. So one thing I want to notice is that you see Patrick's hip is slightly behind the apex of the pad that you're sitting on. So this is where you want to be. You notice if Patrick goes to sit in what will be like a more comfortable position, he goes too far up, this is going to give us more height and also more distance traveling back, which is not something we necessarily want. So the setup, your bum's slightly further back than the apex of the curve. On this side, there's nothing really we can adjust apart from our bum position. However, on this part of the GHD, there's two things that we can start to adjust. The first is this, which you notice it looks like a curve, but in essence, this moves the foot pad backwards and forwards. And then secondly, we can move the foot pad up and down. Arguably, the forward and back is the most important. However, one thing to say on the foot pads up and down is what we want to be able to do is have strong contact when I engage my legs here. So you see right now, if I use this PVC pipe as a bit of a demo as well, we're more or less exactly on line. If this foot pad would come up, then when Patrick kicked, he wouldn't have any tension, would have a lot of space. If it's a lot lower, that means it creates maybe too much tension in the hip to make it harder. Then the final part of the setup, and arguably most important thing for placing the GHD, is how far back or forward we have this foot pad. And the one thing I want you to notice, as we said, Patrick's hips slightly off. The knees are slightly flexed. This is really important because when we go back down, they're going to extend. So if you start with your knees extended, again, it's going to create too much tension in the front of that hip. And if they're too flexed, it's going to be too loose. So really this setup is about finding the optimal place that is going to allow you tension, or the right tension in the bottom position. So if Patrick now goes down, what we'll notice now, obviously the body starts to stretch, we're engaged by the foot, the knees straighten slightly, we've got tension in the hip, he's reaching down and comfortably touching the floor, and then back up. So that setup of the GHD is very important. You need to play about with it for yourself. Obviously test sitting to start with. Then when you go down, it's not going to feel like the most comfortable position in the world, but you don't want to feel overly stressed in the front of the hip. Otherwise, it's probably going to blow the hips up when you start going through the reps. Next, we're going to talk about the sequence of how to initiate the GHD and then how to come back up. So Patrick's seated, we're touching the foot pads, which is usually the standard. In order for Patrick to go down, he's just going to let his body come down. And what you'll notice is the hands relatively tucked in, then touches the floor. On the way back up, there's a slightly different sequence. He's going to use his hands to generate some momentum and then come back up to touch the pad, okay? So as we go down, what we don't want to do, or what we want to do is bring the hands to the body just to minimize the amount of lever we have going down. Once we're down, we just reach touch and then use that momentum to come back up. So obviously, we're demonstrating slightly exaggerated, but what we don't want to happen is that you reach over, because this is going to create a lot of strain on the stomach on the way down, touch, and then come back up. We want to try and minimize that initial leverage as we go down. So one more, if Patrick's just going to demonstrate 5 reps. So comes down, touches back, down, touches back, down, touches. Okay. Nice. So obviously the GHD is a very unusual movement for us to do. We don't typically do something like this in normal life. So if you're just starting, you need to be careful in accumulating reps. It's one of these exercises that you might feel okay doing 50 or even more repetitions in your first session. The trouble is the next few days you're going to be very sore. And also one thing you can start to do is build up the distance here. So you can put pads or make the heights higher, and that's going to make the repetition a lot easier. The final point on the GHD is timing. So what we're actually going to do, you can buy something called a metronome, or you put like a little beep on your phone or timer. But for beginners, it's important to start out roughly every 3 seconds. So that's 1 repetition from hands touching a pad down and back every 3 seconds. And then what you can start to do as you become more advanced, go 2.5 seconds, eventually down to 2 seconds, which is about where the elite athletes will go through their repetitions. And then you can hold yourself accountable. So obviously, if we go through for a whole minute, we'll have accumulated about 20 reps at that first phase, and then we start building to increase that time through. That is the GHD sit-up. Thank you to Patrick for demonstrating. I hope you enjoyed. Any questions or comments, you leave them below and we will get back to them.